Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a video talking about my book buying habits for the year 2024. I've never done one of these videos before, but I thought it yielded some fascinating results when I tallied everything up. I was talking with a friend of mine, and he was saying, yeah, you should probably make a video of this. And I was like, you know what? I probably could. And so what I went through is, because of the YouTube channel is a business, and it does make some money, I have to collect receipts for taxes purposes. And so I was getting a head start on, collecting stuff for 2024. This is the first year that I've actually kept all my receipts. I hadn't really kept up with anything in previous years, but this year I started, and I was astonished at how much I had spent and how many books I'd bought, and there were some really fascinating results. I even kept every receipt from every bookstore, so I knew how many times I went to the store, how many stores did I actually buy books from, how many of my books were bought online as opposed to in person, things like that. And I decided to only count the ones that I bought for the channel. So for instance, I bought a ton of books from Barnes & Noble for family members, for my grandparents, for their birthdays, for Christmas, for my parents for birthdays and Christmases. I buy a lot of books from Barnes & Noble, but it usually goes to those. I didn't buy quite as much from Barnes & Noble this year for me for the YouTube channel, though I did buy a few. I also didn't buy as many from Amazon as I would have expected. Instead, the bulk of my books came from used bookstores, and the high bulk of my books came from one bookstore chain in particular that I'll talk about. And I have my notes here that I might be referring to and looking at during the video. So with the stats that I wanted to cover, this will be a very stats-heavy video, although I do want to talk about experiences at each of these bookstores, talk about some of the advantages, some of the disadvantages, things like that. So I'm going to save the top line, the total numbers, how much money I spent in total, how many books I bought in total, my average per book towards the end. I'm going to start with breaking it down per bookstore. So we're going to start with the first bookstore is one of my local bookstores, which is Second & Charles. Second & Charles is a used bookstore chain. It has some new books, but they're primarily a used bookstore chain. It is formatted very similarly to the company Books-A-Million. If you've ever been to a Books-A-Million and you walk into it, it looks very similar to a Second & Charles. The difference is that Books-A-Million tends to primarily be new books, and sometimes some of them have old used books, but Second & Charles is primarily used books with a few new books. But it's the same company that owns the two, and there is one right in my local area, and I go quite often, actually, to my local Second & Charles. It's just one of those things. I try to go once every couple of weeks just to go and visit, just to see if they have anything. I actually probably go more often than that. I just don't always buy anything when I'm in there. So I ended up going to Second & Charles 19 times in the year 2024, or at least I purchased 19 times. If you count all the times that I just went and browsed, it's probably around 30 or 40. So, once every week and a half, 2 weeks, something like that. But I went 19 times and I bought something those 19 times. And what I love about Second & Charles is that it has very clear sections, and also they tend to have a decent assortment across the board. They have a good assortment of YA books, of science fiction fantasy, of middle grade, of contemporary fiction, of nonfiction. They have a good assortment of stuff. They aren't updated as much as I would hope for, but they do update quite often and get in new books a decent amount. So that's why, it's still worth it, because I'm always thinking, man, what if a new book or a book comes in, they get a book that I really wanted for a while and I miss it because I didn't go in. So I try to go in regularly to see if there's any of the books. I specifically, when I go in Second & Charles, I just hover around different sections based off authors. I'm like, all right, I'm going to look for Dan Wells in the YA section. I'm going to look for Timothy Zahn in the sci-fi section. I'm going to look for Ken Follett in the fiction section. I go to my regular sections to see what they have new. And so in my 19 visits where I paid for books there, I purchased a grand total of 38 books there, which sounds like a lot. It's really not. That's one of the lower amounts of places. And I spent a grand total of $184.51 at Second and Charles for books. And that's not a bad rate. That's not a bad listing for them. The next bookstore I will talk about is a bookstore called Judy Bugs Bookstore. It is the other used bookstore in my town. However, Judy Bugs is a very, very small bookstore. Judy Bugs is basically like a one tiny room bookstore in downtown Columbus they have all sorts of books, just a really small selection. The reason I like to go to Judy Bugs is because, surprisingly, they have a really good mass market paperback section. Their hardcover section is, I don't love it, but their mass market paperback section for science fiction and fantasy is actually pretty good. I know the owner. He likes to stock fantasy and science fiction a lot, and he has a lot of kind of old-timey, like 80s, 70s, 60s science fiction, even some 90s and 2000s. He hasn't gone into the 2000s really with a lot of his past the 2000s too much, but he has a lot of science fiction and fantasy there that I really like. But the store is pretty small, so I don't go that often, and he also doesn't update that often. Rather than buy books traditionally, like having people bring their books in for him to buy and then resell, what he does is he goes to estate sales and he looks at estate sale stuff, so he doesn't do it that often, a couple times a year. And so I only go a couple times a year. So this year I only went 6 times to visit Judy Bugs, and I purchased 6 books. I went more often than that, but I only bought books 6 times. But I bought 6 books from him, so on average of 1 book per visit, which is actually quite low for me. But I try to find something there because I want to support him, because I'm glad that he has another bookstore business. I think it's good for the economy. And I spent $47.91 there. Then we'll talk about a new bookstore, not any new to my area, but like the bookstore that sells new books, and that's Barnes & Noble. Everybody knows Barnes & Noble. If you don't, it would be really surprising if you're watching this type of a video. But Barnes & Noble is a bookstore chain that carries new books. They carry other stuff like games and movies and comics and manga, stuff like that. But they're known for being a bookstore. And I specifically go there to buy new books. I specifically go there when there's a new release and I am really excited for that new release and want to read it, or when there is a book that I just can't find at the used bookstores, and I know they have a version of it at the new bookstore, and it's like, you know what, I really am intent to read this. This happened there were some authors I wanted to interview, but I didn't have copies of their books, and so it's like, you know what, I'll go buy the new one. I prefer not to buy new unless it's a brand new release that I'm excited about, because new copies are really expensive. But I did buy some Barnes & Noble for me. That being said, this is not all the money I spent at Barnes & Noble this year, because I spent a ton of money on gifts for family members. So this number could be easily twice as much. But I went to Barnes & Noble and paid 8 times in the year 2024. So about, once every month and a half. And I purchased 9 books during those 8 visits. So about 1 book a visit, which is pretty normal about, whenever a new release came out mostly. And I spent $206 about on books there. And so Barnes & Noble, one of the advantages of Barnes & Noble is that it is new books, and also they have the ability to order new books. So if there is a book by an author that I'm interested in, usually they either have it or they have the ability to ship it in. But with the way shipping usually goes, it's just easier for me, if I'm going to ship something in, to ship it to me. So it doesn't always that methodology. But like, for instance, when Wind and Truth came out in December, I knew they were going to have copies, so I secured one for me and one for my brother-in-law to get for him for Christmas. He doesn't watch my videos, but I I go to Barnes & Noble also because usually the books are in pretty good condition there. Amazon, unfortunately, I love buying from them because they're cheaper, but so often my books get damaged with Amazon, whereas Barnes & Noble, usually I have a very good experience buying books. They're usually in very good condition there. And also I just like the atmosphere, being able to walk into a bookstore, and I like there being other readers. I like when I can go and buy a book and there is someone there who's also read the book, that type of thing. I can't really do that with Amazon as much. So I did, I spent, a lot of money there, $206, which is more than all the used, for 9 books, I spent $200 there. Whereas I bought 38 books at Second and Charles, but it was cost less for the 38 because used books are much cheaper to buy. But let's talk about the Big Kahuna. The Big Kahuna was the bookstore that I didn't go to a crazy amount of times. I went there a lot, but I spent a crazy amount of money there. And that is McKays Bookstore. If you're a fan of my channel, if you've watched a lot of my videos, you've probably heard me talk about how awesome McKays is. McKays is a bookstore chain. I think they have 5 stores. I know they have one in Knoxville, one in Chattanooga, one in Nashville, one in Greensboro, and I think one in Memphis, although I don't know where the 5th one is. But they have 5 locations, and I have, in my life, visited 3 of their locations. But I frequent 2 of them. I frequent the Chattanooga location and the Knoxville location. The Chattanooga location because my sister lives near Chattanooga, the Knoxville location because my parents live near Knoxville. So I go there, frequently, and I always make sure to stop. And you would think that I would, because, whenever I go there, I'd be responsible. But there is something about this store that screams, give me all your money. It is a huge bookstore. It's basically like a huge warehouse. And there's just rows and rows and rows of books. And they pack the books in deep, so they have a ton of books on display. And sometimes I'll be able to find an entire series, like an entire 10-book series by an author right there, and I'm like, that's great, I can buy all the 10 books, I don't need to go looking for them, it's so easy. I don't want to buy just the first 5, because then what if I need books 6 through 10 and they're not there? So I spend so much money. I went to McKay's 10 times, which is far less than I went to my local bookstore, Second and Charles. But at those 10 times, I purchased 107 books. That is an average of over 10 books per visit that I would go and buy. That's crazy. That's crazy that I do that. It is. I have a problem with my visiting to McKay's books, but my 107 books there cost about $426, and so. That sounds, that I spent twice as much there as at Barnes & Noble, but at Barnes & Noble I bought 9 books. At McKay's I bought 107, so I bought 10 times as many books for only twice the price. So that's a pretty good deal. McKay's, one of the advantages is they are traditionally cheaper. However, in the last about 12 to 18 months, I have noticed a market increase in their prices on the average item. Of course, I don't track individual items because that'd be crazy, but I do see what do most of their used hardcovers go for. What do they use mass markets? And sometimes I find a mass market for 25 cents. Amazing. I love that. And it's in pretty good condition sometimes. And sometimes I find mass markets for like $10. And I'm like, it's a mass market. It should cost less than $10. So it's all over the place, but I know what the average is. And you can tell the average. Maybe it's just because of inflation, but there's been a market increase there. Second and Charles has pretty much kept their prices the same. My local bookstore, Second and Charles, their prices haven't really increased. Maybe a little bit with hardcovers, but mass markets and trade paperbacks pretty much are the same they've been the last 3 years that I've lived here. So that's the one negative of McKay's, is that they are increasing their prices. But it is a great selection. It is a huge store, and there is just a feeling of, man, everybody comes here. And, if you don't like crowds, it might be daunting because a lot of people go to McKays. There is a huge, at 2nd and Charles, you might be one of 5 people in the store. At Judy Bugs Bookstore, you will be the only person in the store. At Barnes & Noble, there might be a lot of people there, but it's huge and spread out. At McKays, every time I've gone, there's been like 50 or 100 people there. Like, there's a lot of people there at McKays because it's a big deal. But, I mean, you can't deny the average price for a book at McKays is like, that I've bought at least, tends to be around $4 for a used book. And that's including, I bought a lot of hardcovers, a lot of mass markets, a lot of trades. That's a pretty good deal. So I really love the experience of buying at McKays. And it is my favorite bookstore, despite the fact that I have a problem of spending too much money there. I have bought books from Amazon this year. I've bought about 12 books from Amazon, and then I spent about $245 on those 12 books because they were all new. That's about what I spent at like Barnes & Noble. And then I bought 7 books from ABE Books. That was about $51. And then I bought a few books from some miscellaneous websites when I was like, I have a podcast that I'm part of, which is the Star Trek Literary Treks podcast, and sometimes I need to just find a random website that has the random book that I'm looking for, and other times similar things. And I would like to point out, I did not count any of the books I was gifted this year because I can't use those on tax write-offs, and also just I didn't want to have to go through and try to figure out which books were gifted, which books weren't, so I just went off that. And I'm just now realizing I did not include the books that I purchased at conventions, because you don't really get receipts for those usually, and so I didn't calculate. So if I included the books I bought at conventions, this number would be so much higher. Anyway, let's talk about the ones. So if we're talking about the ones I've bought from bookstores and then Amazon and ABE, and I'm going to take a moment before I calculate everything to talk about Amazon and ABE. Amazon, everybody knows the experience with Amazon, but ABE is a used bookstore website owned by Amazon. And so I know people who say, I hate Amazon, so therefore I'm not going to go to ABE. But what's great about ABE is it is a bunch of used bookstores, chains bookstores, sometimes individual bookstores, that will put their selection online for you to buy. And that there might be a bookstore somewhere that is, I could never go to that bookstore to visit. And so they may have a book there that I would want to buy, but they can't sell to anyone in their local area, so they can't get rid of the book. By putting it online, I can buy the book, they ship it to me. Sometimes I pay the shipping, sometimes there is no shipping fee if it's a large enough order, things like that. But they ship it to me, I get the book I want, the used book that might be an out-of-print book, they get the business deal, and ABE through Amazon gets a cut of the money. So everybody wins. So I think that ABE is great. I don't buy that often because I'm personally I want to buy in person, but I think ABE is great. So ABE Books, look them up. If you can't find a book in your local bookstore, everyone says go to eBay. eBay's I still feel weird about buying books on eBay, but ABE I think is great. So let's do some of the math on all the books I purchased, lumping them all together. I calculated, and of course I could be wrong because there could be a few receipts that I missed. I know I missed all the receipts from the conventions that I bought books at, so this would be way larger. But the grand total is $1,162. And I purchased a total of 179 books. And that, is a lot. And I'm pretty sure I know that's the most I've ever spent on books in a single year. However, there's a couple of things. One is I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this video that YouTube, the YouTube channel is a business. I do make some money off of it, not a lot, but a little bit. And so the YouTube channel kind of covers this and the expenses for when I go to conventions and stuff. So this is I still have a full-time job outside of YouTube, but I spent $1,100, which, to be honest, is about what I thought I did. I didn't think I spent more than $1,300, and I knew I spent more than $1,000. So that's about what I figured. 179 purchased books. That's actually that's not including the ones I bought at conventions, which probably would put me close to about 200 or 210. And then when you include gifts for family members, that balloons even more. And then when you add in books that were sent to me by publishers, authors, and marketing directors, the number of books I collected this year is probably in the 250 to 300 range. But for books I purchased for me, is 179 from bookstores, Amazon, or ABE. And I calculated that my average is I spend about $6.50 per book. That's including new books. So the average between all the new books I bought and all the used books I bought is about $6.50, which is not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. It's not a bad average. And I also calculated every time I go to a bookstore, how many books am I buying at that bookstore? And the overall average is 5.4 books per visit, which is super high. You remember I told you that at Barnes & Noble and at Judy Bugs, I buy maybe 1 book per visit. And at Second & Charles, I only buy 2 books per visit on average. Well, the reason that number, the average is so high at 5.4 is because McKays is killing the number at like 10.7 books per visit. So it's a huge number. So yeah, that's a lot of books per visit. 5.4 is pretty high. But I think it's worth it because I'm reading a lot of these books, and a lot of them I will get to. There might be books I bought that I never get to, but we'll see. We'll cross that road when we get there. I'm a proponent of helping the local businesses. I'm a proponent of generating discussions about books. I'm also a proponent of seeing if books are interesting to my audience. If the audience is like, "Oh, that book you bought that, I'm so excited." I'm like, that might make me more excited to read it because other people are talking about it. So I'm pretty happy with where the year went. I hope I learn to control myself next year and not spend as much money on books. But I don't think I bought any new bookshelves this year. So, hey, at least I didn't spend money on bookshelves. I usually spend, buy 1 or 2 bookshelves per year. So that's this video. I know that this was a really stats-heavy video, but let me know in the comments what you thought of it. Which of these bookstores have you ever visited? What are the types of bookstores near you? And what's your regular place to buy books? Do you usually buy used? Do you buy new? Do you buy, where do you buy them? Amazon, Barnes & Noble? Let me know all your thoughts. And also, do you have a problem like me? You can join Bookaholics Buyers Anonymous, BBA. But until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.